All right, everybody. Hello. I'm seeing people are still signing in, so I don't want to go too fast into the intro. But I will say hello and welcome. Thank you for joining me. I know we're getting close to the holiday season, so I know your time is precious at this point in the year. So thank you for joining me. My name's Carly Patterson. I'm a project manager and instructional designer with Innovative Learning Group. And today I'm going to walk through a case study of a project I worked on last year within Innovative Learning Group. I should start saying we worked on. I'm very excited about this project, so I sometimes take too much ownership. But so this is called the Onboarding Overhaul, aligning people, process, and performance. And I wanted to talk through the project that was a little less prescriptive, a little bit more practical, and tried to match the rhythm of the job for the audience in this particular case. So before we get too far, a couple of housekeeping items. First, ILG, we're a performance first learning company. We've been going 21 years strong, and we're founded by our CEO, Lisa Tunnegus. That's her picture in the lower corner there. And we are a certified women's business enterprise. We have more than 250 clients across 35 industries. So a really small but mighty company. And as far as logistics for this specific meeting, we do have a chat function, and I do have that on my screen to the left of me. So if you see me looking left, I'm just trying to make sure I'm keeping tabs of what's happening. But we also have support here in the name of Walter Schermacher. So he will be watching the chat. So if you have any questions, specifically technical items, he's here to support us. And at the end of this, we will have a short survey. Please go ahead and complete that. Let me know if you liked the webinar, if you liked the presenter, if you liked the topic, things like that. Now, we will have a YouTube link for specifically this webinar that is recorded. And we'll also send out a slide deck that will be emailed. Because of the holiday, it will be delayed about a week, but you will receive basically a copy of this to revisit as you need. So what we're going to go through is an overview of the project, the request that came to us, the issues highlighted in the request, the research we conducted to address the issues that were brought to us, what the objectives were that we came up with after the research, the outputs that we then designed and delivered in response, and initial results. So not only the initial results, but a year later, we did follow up and see how it was being incorporated. And we'll talk through how this has been incorporated and a little bit about if it was evaluated, how it was evaluated. There will be questions throughout. Again, you can look into your chat and add those answers to my questions, but then when we get to Q&A, this is where you can ask your questions to me and we can have a discussion. So first, who is the client? This is one of our automotive manufacturing clients. And with automotive manufacturing specifically, you've got a lot of different kinds of topics to train on and a lot of different ways to train on those topics. And on the screen, you'll see just some of these items, right? You've got safety and compliance, things like protective gear, what OSHA rules are there and how we're adhering to them. Do we have hazardous materials? How do we handle those? You've got your technical items, your equipment operation, how to do that safely and correctly. The quality control, how are we making sure that what leaves the building is on par for the quality standards we have. Lean manufacturing, trying to see how we're going to make things better. Quality control, continuous improvement, all of that. And then, of course, you have your company specific items, anything like policies and procedures, your new employee orientation items, anything that falls into there. And then your leadership and soft skills. We are people dealing with other people at times. For most people, unless you're working too much on a machine, I guess, but I still think you're going to have some sort of interactions and conversations with others. So you want to have those skills match the culture and the environment that you're in. The other thing I did want to point out is because it's automotive manufacturing, there are some unique restrictions when we're talking about how training happens. So, for example, the unions sometimes dictate what can be taught, when it can be taught, how it can be taught. So that's one parameter, a set of parameters. You also are talking about interesting spaces, right? It's not just a conference room, it's not some cubicles. You've got large buildings, large pieces of machinery, lots of noise. You do have to consider those pieces of information. And then you're also talking about multiple shifts. It's not everybody comes in at 8, everybody leaves at 5. So these are some of the items that we're just looking at about who are we talking about when we say our client. The audience specifically then is the role that takes care of all of that training we just discussed. And by all of it, I mean literally all of it. They don't necessarily just make sure it happens. Sometimes they track completion. Sometimes they facilitate it themselves. And this is the training and development leader, or is what we'll call it now, TDL. They're responsible for the coordinating and recording the completion of training activities, like I mentioned, but they also represent the plant or facility which they are assigned. So in this environment, they pretty much had one TDL per facility. Sometimes there was overlapping. One person would have more than one. There was one facility that had two TDLs to handle all the training needs. But the main part to consider with that is they're there to consolidate the needs and the inputs of all parties involved in the delivery and completion of those kinds of training. So this is not only the larger organization, but then we're talking about the manufacturing organization, and then we're talking about their plant and facility, and then we're talking about the functions within that plant and facility. So this is a group of people that really have to look at all the moving pieces. What we found out, or the request that came to us, was that this function had been handled by an external vendor, and then the company decided, hey, we need to bring this in-house. As what happens sometimes in big changes like that, we start noticing some gaps. One of the gaps they found out was there wasn't one set of instructions or materials that supported the TDL role to say, this is what your job is, here's how to do it, here's your tools and resources to help you. Everybody was kind of in their own silo, trying to figure out within their plant or facility how to achieve what they understood to be their job. So our primary audience was any new TDL that was coming in, so that there could be one standard of this is what you're doing and why. But also we wanted to loop in the existing TDLs to say, hey, you may not have been on the same page of knowing that resource X is out here. We want to make sure you know this. Or, hey, there's this one process that we've incorporated at this other building. We think this would be good for everybody to know. So those were our two audiences. And the goal then was to provide them a set of self-study resources specific to their role. So here's where I want to pause for a second, and I'll start looking over to the chat. Now you notice that I said self-study. This was a request from the client to us, and they said, how this needs to happen is a self-study. And I just want to see if you all can brainstorm some ideas of why might that be the case. Again, there's not any right or wrong answer. And I know I've not given you a ton of information. So what I'm trying to do here throughout the presentation is just, get those gears working. If you were in my position if you were in our team's position, what would you ask when it comes to, why self-study? I'll give you a few minutes there. I see we have 29 people. Nice. Don't everybody talk at once. Okay. So the frequency, right? So if we're talking about onboarding, is this happening once a year, once a quarter? Ah, I love that. It's the core to study by yourself. Cheaper, ownership, right? Scalable, different locations. So before I prepared for today, I thought, you know what? I just want to remind all of us who are in this L&D space, specifically dealing with adults, if we remember some of our adult learning concepts. And I think a couple of you have already spoke to this, but let's elaborate a little bit. What is adult learning? And then how are we applying the concept of onboarding, self-study to adults? And what are those principles that we really want to highlight? And you can use Google. I cannot see you. I cannot look over your shoulder. Choice, owning your learning. For somebody in a manufacturing setting specifically, do you think, there we go at your pace. Do you think they're busy? Do you think they can approach this in a leisurely manner? Going to the let them choose and decide how to learn, that's a really big one, right? But also, we want to think of bringing past experiences. We also want to address the real world problems. So if we back up and we say, hey, you've got a few different planes of what you have to keep in mind: corporate, manufacturing, facility specific, function specific. We're talking about very specific real world problems. So self-study was really supposed to help really hone in on your purpose, your goal. Yes, we want to give you all the tools and the paths and the purpose, the terminology and all that, but how are you going to really apply it? So then let's move on to the main constraints. And this really feeds into some of the reasons of why we chose self-study. First, no day is the same. This is what we were told, and we'll later prove that we found this out, but TDLs don't have a consistent schedule. So their daily tasks are subject to the needs of their plant facility, often for that day. So it's hard to say, okay, here's a day in the life of a TDL, copy paste. They told us outright that that was not going to be how this worked. Again, their facility influence. So they're responsive to their plant and facility, as well as the other layers up. We also had a small audience size. At this point in time, there was only 24 TDLs. So to the point about, how often are we doing this onboarding? Not very often. So this isn't something that would make sense to do a VILT, an ILT, right? Because are you going to do this for an audience of one, an audience of two? Are you doing this on a regular schedule? Are you doing this as needed? So we wanted to kind of remove that noise. And then looking at the current onboarding. So again, because there was that gap from external to internal, we were finding out that there wasn't a consistent onboarding experience. So again, we wanted to say, okay, while our main audience are new hires, our larger audience for right now are those existing TDLs. So let's give them something that fits into their life right now so that they can maybe recalibrate or use their materials at the time of need. Just checking to see. All right, everybody's still. So here's what we did. First, we did some research. We had 14 hours of interviews. We talked to many of these TDLs themselves. We talked to a couple of their direct managers, and we talked to representatives from both manufacturing and corporate L&D to try to get an understanding of, what do you think this role is? What are you responsible for? And then we also validated some of this and informed some of our interviews with 12 different documents. We're looking at what was covered in your new employee orientation already. What information should you have from new employee orientation? What job postings are out there? And what do the job postings say you need to be able to do? What skills you need to possess? Things like that. And then we looked at some of the critical documents that the TDLs were actually using and had to use. And we'll cover some of those later. And then we did send out an 18-question survey to the TDLs. And then we did have one person from the manufacturing L&D answer as well. And I did get the data. I found out that it was over 80%. That's how many people actually completed their survey. That was one thing of this project. The TDLs were very engaged. They were very interested. So I know that doesn't happen often in projects. Sometimes, it can feel like pulling teeth. That wasn't the case here. It was a situation that they saw a need and they wanted to close that gap. So it was nice to have that change. So now that I've just given you a little bit more information, what would be your top 3 questions? So your client comes to you, it needs to be self-study, it needs to be for onboarding, it needs to be for this complex role. Again, putting on your hat, if you were in our role, maybe what are some questions? And let's see if we can have, maybe top 3. I'm going to take a drink of my water. Would any of you have no questions? Okay. What did they want to achieve? What skills they need? And what do they have? So it's kind of looking at that gap, right? What was the gap? Expectations, that's a great one. What are you hoping to achieve? What are you hoping the TDLs will use and take away from this experience? The coaching, how are we going to support whatever we create when it comes to self-study? Because if it's self-study, are we going to have any sort of completion, a box to check? All right, let's keep moving. So if you haven't picked up yet, the TDLs are very busy. They were not joking, and actually sitting with them and talking with them and completing the analysis that we did, which I will highlight. They're just always going, and they're always going a lot of different paces and for solving a lot of different issues. What I'm going to highlight here is the main focus of their role, which is training. So we looked at the training catalog for manufacturing, and we tried to figure out how is the training being delivered. And as you'll see, we've got 60% of these training events that these TDLs are responsible for are ILTs. So what does that mean? That means we got to figure out how to get butts in seats. We have to make sure we have rooms. We have to make sure we have materials. How are we going to get people here from different shifts? Who's going to lead it? And as mentioned, there's different constraints when we're talking about, is this on the floor talking about a piece of machinery? Is this in a classroom talking about some soft skills? So a lot of time goes into the ILT logistics and things like that. This is also a group that was largely paper-based when it came to tracking. So in an ILT situation, you have people actually literally signing in And the TDL had to make sure to capture that and then enter it in to identify who actually completed these ILTs. When it's talking about when, now thankfully, most of the materials only had to be completed once. So this is some of those intro items, those onboarding items specific to tasks and roles. But you'll notice you also have different time increments. When you're looking at, every 5 years, every 3 years, every 2 years on the right side of the pie, a lot of these you're talking about certifications. And when you're talking about certifications, you're talking often people can't touch X piece of machinery unless they have completed these trainings. So that's just another level of complexity, right? It's not just, did you complete your security, information security course? This is, can you actually do your job or not? So then when you're talking about the who is the training going to, they're looking at 13 different job families. And you'll see the bulleted list. This is just an idea of how the different training is spread across. And I guess the high level topics, right? Which ones are required, which ones are specific to a job, and then which one is specific to the business need. So again, the TDLs not only they have to have all this information, they have to kind of connect the dots everywhere and have the layer of what does the function leadership say? What does the manufacturing leadership say? What does the organization leadership say? So lots of different, I do have a question, sorry. Did you do a role analysis? Ooh, I'm not sure what you mean by role analysis. I'll keep going, but I'll keep an eye on that. We did a task analysis. I'm not sure if that's what you mean, and I believe that is coming next. Yes. So what we did was a job task analysis. So we sat down again with these TDLs and we said, what is it that you do, whether it's in a day, a week, a month, or a year? And we came up with a pretty hefty list of items. And you'll see in the image to the right, there's a lot of yearly with an asterisk mark. This was representative of just how different each TDL was in their roles and responsibilities. You might have one extreme of saying, I need to do this maybe every day, to the other extreme of, I only have to do this once a year. So some of these, we found some gray in the middle, but for the yearlies, we were able to say, okay, at some point during the year, you have to make sure that you do this, but we'll put an asterisk just in case you also have to revisit it. Or maybe it's something that comes up more regularly for you, but at least once a year. From that, we highlighted which items were your main tasks, and then we were able to say which items were supporting tasks into that main. So if you look over on the bottom left, the develop a localized training matrix, that would be one of your main tasks. And the two bullets underneath that were your subtasks. So develop a localized training matrix. In order to complete that, we have to run roster reports, for example, or we have to create a list of the job classification codes. So this was specific to who's in your building. How do you identify that? And then to the right of that task column, we asked, what do you need to know in order to complete those tasks? Is there any technology that you have to know how to use or have access to complete that task? And then also, are there any people resources? Do you have to go to HR to get the roster reports? Do you have to go to your plant leadership to figure out what all job roles are in the building? So we took that, just making sure I didn't miss any questions. No. And I jumped ahead, but I think we'll stay here for a second. So we took those original constraints, we narrowed them down, retooled them, I guess, and said, okay, now these are the parameters that we're going to use to move forward. So again, we reemphasize, how do the TDLs work? We understand that each TDL who's responsible for an individual plant, they're going to have different rules and responsibilities, time, frequency, things like that. Also, everybody's day is not the same. We have to keep that in mind. There is no day in the life in terms of this onboarding. We also really had to understand at this point, the union influenced a lot. We're talking about who's facilitating sometimes. We're talking about when they're coming in. We're talking about what they can teach and how they can teach it. So this was a constraint that we really had to make sure got fed throughout our design. We also had to make sure that we set the stage. I alluded to this before, where we needed to make sure everybody was starting back at a baseline for some key things. This included terminology. This included a recalibration on culture, making sure we all understood what the culture was and how it influenced this job. And then we also really wanted to look at the picture beyond an individual TDL's plant and say, here's the whole big picture and where do you fit into it? And then how does that play into other facilities? We also realized to complete this job successfully, you had to have soft skills. You had to be able to communicate, for example, on various levels with lots of different kinds, levels of people. You had to talk to leadership just as you had to be able to talk to somebody working a machine. You also had to troubleshoot. You know, not everything goes your way. I know in the training world, we're always, everything goes our way, right? Enter sarcasm here. Well, imagine that magnified. So where do we go from here? We go to our objectives. We asked the questions. We found some commonalities. We said, here's what your jobs are. Here's the order of importance about what is a main task versus a subtask. We also figured out, what are the different components that support those. Those main tasks, then, we turned into objectives. So I'll just read these through real quick because they will be referenced at a couple points later. So the first one was they had to acquire the training matrix. So this is one of those critical documents. This is what articulates those pie charts. What is the course catalog? What type of training are we talking about? The modalities, who is it for, things like that. They then had to develop their local training matrix. So, okay, we've got a big organization, we have manufacturing. What happens in my building? Then they had to develop what they called a forecast, where they said, okay, this is what needs to happen in our building. How are we going to do that in a year? And then you had to maintain it. So month one, how did we do? If we didn't complete what we wanted in month one, how does that trail down? How does that influence everything else? Then below the line, you've got some more discrete items. They had, or actually not discrete, the opposite, more wide, like coordinating the trainings, as I mentioned, location, inviting people, things like that. At some points, they would have to facilitate the training. They have to record the learner completions. A lot of this was the paper-based. So not only do we provide the sheets to sign up, we collect them, we enter them in, so we can log that they've actually completed it. The validating learning completions was more for your e-learning going into your LMS. Did the course actually register that you took the course? Did your course get stuck and we have to restart it? All of that kind of troubleshooting. They have to maintain the forecast, like I mentioned. If something doesn't get done here, it has to still be done. So where do we fit it in? And what ramifications happen after that? And how are we going to deal with that? They then report it out. They're just not doing this in a bubble. They have to explain to leadership, again, on those different levels, what's getting completed, where's our pain points, what are we maybe struggling with. And then on top of that, they also had to make sure to say, is this training working like it should? Is it outdated? Are our facilitators doing what we need? So evaluating those training events on top of it. So again, I know there's a lot of information, and I'm sure that there's a lot of questions buzzing around in your head. So I just want to see, thinking back to your questions that we've come up to here, what do you think are maybe some top 5 items that should be in the onboarding? So if you are just going to create a rough list of 5 items that have to be in your design document, what do you think you would include? Maybe you don't have a list of 5. Maybe just give me one. Um, I would say content. Okay, your corporate mission, vision, values. So this speaks to the what are we trying to do for this organization? What's important to them? How do we achieve that goal? Right? What is the matrix? What are we supposed to do with it? How do we get it? It's a pretty complex Excel sheet as well. So there's some of the how do I even read it? How do I navigate it to make it specific to me? Production team, timeline, sign off. Okay. Timeline's a big one, right? Because it sounds like, okay, you've got a year, but things do get a little bit more discrete, specifically in the plants to say what needs to be trained when. There are some items that only happen in Q3. That's where they always are. That's where they need to be. Those are not movable pieces. How do we make sure that you assess and evaluate training? Correct. Are there any rubrics? What makes good? How do we decide if it's good or not? See, can we get one more? Ah, yes. Okay. Welcome to the plant. This is your home now. Who works here? What are we doing? Why do we do this? Where does it go next? And then the critical policies. Great. So yeah, you're all on the same page. So our outputs. Our first was the design document. So we had our objectives. Now, how are we going to meet those objectives? It's a big job. There was a lot of objectives. There was 27 content items that we proposed. And when we're looking at an estimate of the time for the learners to complete this design, we're looking at about 58 to 88 hours. And this is something that it's a huge range, but it will make sense in a second. But I'm sure you can kind of understand why that range exists. What our main output is a playbook. So again, we're talking self-study. So we're going to put it into a playbook. In other words, we're going to give you one unit that says, here's everything you need to know. And then we included at the front, here's your learner journey. So if you're a new TDL, we're estimating it's going to take you 3 weeks. And here's how we're going to suggest you go through it. And within that playbook, we linked out or created 48 documents to support the objectives. And this totaled about 247 pages of content or slides. We also created 13 support items. So these were different things that were going to be used in support of the learner journey. So we tried to, again, think at a big range for this very big role. So what I'm going to go through now is some highlights about what are some of the outputs. What do they actually look like? So here's one item of the learner journey. So you see on the top right, you have week 1, day 1. So you'll see some of the items that were mentioned here. Not only the role of the TDL, but the facility type. This was one of our big takeaways, was there was an existing document that explained which different facility was responsible for which specific task, but also where they were located. And then that chart also had information like who is your TDL? How many people are in the facility? Because that's another piece we found out. One facility may have less than 100 people. One facility may have thousands of people. So the sortable chart became this, who do I go reach out to? Who might be my closest peer, either in how many people we're talking about managing or in what we're actually producing, which means, what machines are we both using? How are we going to train this? Kind of building up that community. The learning the AMC speak, this was what are some of the common terms that we use around here? How do they fit into each other? How to basically speak the speak. The role of the union. This is a big component. We wanted to make sure on day one that this was understood and appreciated because this did provide some rigid structures for some items. And then the TDL skill results driven, that was one of our first soft skill items where we said, okay, this company really wants you to push forward. We want you to figure this out. If we're saying this all has to be completed in a year, we're looking to you, TDL, to figure out how to make it happen. So we need you to have that soft skill that you're just going to push it forward and figure it out. The network, this is also playing well into that facility type item. Again, who are you talking with and how are you going to connect with them and why would you reach out to them? This, funny enough, ended up being one of the outputs that the TDLs immediately said, this is great, this is perfect, we wish we would have had this all along. Come to find out, one TDL actually had created this for themselves. So we didn't really even need to create it as much as we needed to just format it and clean it up. So this isn't just who are my fellow TDLs that I work with, but this is also documenting who in the plant do I need to reach out to for what? Who do I need to reach out to in those different levels and for what? What's their number? What's their email? What's their preference of how they will communicate? Is this person only going to react to me if I walk into their office? I'm going to log that as a note to remind myself. And then week 2, day 1, this is where you start seeing a little bit of a deeper dive. What's the system that I'm using? So if I'm going to log learner completion, if I'm going to use an LMS, what is it? How do I access it? How do I use it? What is the training matrix? Give them an activity to actually practice with it in a safe environment. A lot of their outputs were Excel based. So in case they were not that great Excel, we needed to get them up to speed pretty quickly. And what we wanted to do is give them a safe place to do that. So, step back. You're not looking at your matrix. You're not looking at your forecast. Let's just start with a blank piece of paper. What are some of the key functions we want to learn? Learning some specific items like the job person code, something like that. I think all organizations sometimes have items that are kind of tricky in how that they are discussed. And for this group, the job classification code was one of those. So understanding how did it get built? How do we read it? And at the bottom there, you'll see some activities that we said, all right, you're going to start this and you need to continue it. And there was a description that was an edit that I needed to. Okay, cool. Sorry, I was looking at a question. So the localizing the training matrix activity, this is where we said it could take you 27 hours, depending on how many people you're actually looking at, how many different job roles you're responsible for. It may take you a long time. So give yourself grace that you need that time to do it. It's not going to be a 30-minute task. It's not going to be something that you can just, do on a weekend. You really want to sit down with it because you have to go to your network and talk through things. And then the communication activity, we said, okay, not only do you need to know what we mean by communication, and we give you some examples of what this means in real world scenarios, but now we want you to actually go talk to some of your fellow TDLs who've been through this and say, how did you approach, scenario 1? Or what was your most eye-opening communication event. Sounds like I have a question about what tool. This is easy. We used Word and PowerPoint. This is something, and I'll talk in initial results was when I was going to talk about this, but I can talk about it now, is their goal was to eventually put it into an interactive item or an interactive tool. They wanted to do something that would have, almost like a left nav that they could navigate quite easily to. We kind of did that using Word and PowerPoint, but yeah, this was a simple execution as far as how we built it. Here's a few other pieces. This is an example of some of those core content items. In your top left, this is an example of who all they needed to talk to. So what does a TDL do? That means, sorry, I'm going to pause. What does a TDL do? And a lot of this is connecting people, places, concepts, things like that. And in that little flower wheel, these are all the groups of people that they are responsible for connecting. You've obviously got your learners, but you've got, right, the enterprise, the plants, your union, the people actually doing the job. In the top right, it's an example of what we created in PowerPoint. It was a simple true false question about how you can work with a union. There was a few of those just to kind of remind themselves what's important there. You've got your basics of Excel down at the bottom, where again, we said, here's how you find something. And then the network activity that I talked about, just a simple table in a Word document that gave them all the different groups to reach out to if they hadn't already, and a place to store it. Here's the example of the soft skills, some of them. And so in the top left, you'll see sometimes we just linked to some quick videos to say, we know what problem solving is, for example, but just in case you want to get more terminology or just prep your brain for learning more, go watch these videos to see what we're talking about. And then there would be activities and scenarios in them. And that's what you're kind of seeing in the catty corner, top right, bottom left, is we would find real scenarios talking to the existing TDLs. Okay, results driven, for example, top right. An area has a new lift. Normally the lift is driven by skilled trades, but this particular lift is driven by an hourly employee. This audience doesn't usually drive the lifts, so they're not trained. So what's the best course of action? That's something that actually happened. So we, said to be results driven, what are you going to do? Did some suggested actions, and then in general, what you're trying to achieve. All right. And here are some items that deal with more the actual training components. So how to localize the training matrix step by step. We've got what kinds of training for who. This is in the top right. We're talking required, job specific, and business case types of training. So who does this go out to? And that's the list of the different kinds of learners you're looking at. A checklist. So some of these items, like the localizing the training matrix, we did kind of a pros, and then we would pair that with a checklist so that in the future, all you need is just go check, check, check to remind yourself. And then the instructor-led training coordination checklist, making sure that it's not just that the training's happening, but in the right place with the right people and that we're tracking it. So the initial results is the TDLs who actually worked on the project as SMEs, they immediately identified that network activity as a big win. Part of the network activity, as well as some of the other soft skills, we encourage the TDLs to actually go talk to each other, kind of start breaking down that siloed mentality and the siloed behavior, really engage to say, you're not in this by yourself. You may be one TDL in a huge plant, but you do have peers in the whole organization. So make sure you utilize them, share your lessons learned, pain points, things like that. There were some additional needs that we identified and we built in the playbook that were included post design. It just came out as we were developing certain uh, outputs. So this included things like one plant needed to know how to request and manage grants and the money that came from that. We had some Excel, I don't want to say wizards, but people that were actually into Excel and knew how to do more than just the basic skills. So we gave them some more support of how to use those skill sets within things like the matrix and the forecast and things like that. When we talked to them about a year later, it was a spotty hit and miss application based on who gave us responses in the results. The survey didn't get as high of a response, so I wouldn't say that that was the end all be all for that data, but it does sound like there needs to be a little bit more communication. If I were to say, if we were to go back and add on to this, I would maybe add some things specifically for managers of the TDLs. And I think somebody had mentioned that, how does this get executed? How are they being supported? And I think the managers really need to understand the playbook exists and to be able to point to it. Okay. At this point, I think we have enough time for some questions. So hopefully this was helpful. I think we only had one person drop off, so I'm going to say that's a win. All right, so we're going to take off the mute so that everybody can pitch in and speak if you would like. Yes, so the onboarding that to lead off this whole case study, the onboarding was specifically for the TDL role. It's kind of meta, right? Because they are the ones dealing with the training, but we wanted to make sure it's, I guess, maybe a large train the trainer we could think of. The owner was it was somebody in the manufacturing L&D space for the most part. Do we have other questions? So I presented this at an ATD event recently, and what I wanted to open up to this group, what I opened up to them was, what do you think about this case study? What do you think about this process? Is it, a little unnerving to think that we sent this out and it's just self-study and we had to rely on the adult learning principles? Do you think that was a sound decision? Okay. Trust issues, right? Learning methods embedded like podcast videos, hands-on experience. So yeah, the hands-on experiences, those were those activities. For example, complete your training matrix, or localize your training matrix. That was an example of a hands-on activity. No podcasts at the moment, but videos. There was a few different videos when it came to how to fill out some of these tools. So again, a lot of these were large Excel documents. They had lots of different columns, rows, different moving pieces. For the forecast, for example, there was the idea of how much do you forecast? And then when you go to update it, how do you update it? So those had some videos. Okay, Scott, give us a call. Todd, considering the research of the audience, do you want to come off mute? What is the specific question?
No, I was just answering what you asked earlier. So it's it's really the audiences. That's the reason why you went with what you went, I think.
Yeah,
And it's not what your solution is not one size fits all. So for this case study, it seems to be the right way to go.
thank you. That's what that's what we ended up thinking as well. And it's one of those that as it gets more incorporated, if they find out, everybody's got this one question and it comes up once a quarter. Maybe, forecasting is a concept that needs to be reiterated. Maybe we end up building something that is more, they need to track it. But for right now, give them the tools to attack their unique challenges. I saw a question. Uh, okay. What advice would you give to those who onboard many different types of sales roles? Lindsay, would you mind going off of mute and saying a little bit more?
Yeah, so we scoped out and tried to define at least two different tracks for onboarding.
Okay.
And I use a playbook and it's very blended. Um,
Okay.
but it feels impossible for me as a team of one to keep everything updated, where it just kind of feels like it's constantly broken. And I don't know maybe about switching the format that, because it's a mix of there's some like kind of self-study with documents and activities, there's some e-learnings, but especially when it comes to our systems, I'm not the subject matter expert, so it feels very difficult to get the owner of the systems to provide us with anything for onboarding. So I just, um, if there's anyone else that's like one person that oversees onboarding and training for a lot of people. I don't know. I guess maybe just some tips on doing things where maybe it needs updated a little less, or maybe it's more scalable.
Okay. And for the updating, it's content specific items that you have to update?
It's content specific, and then we will bring in roles that are nuanced, where managers will want to adjust the onboarding.
Okay.
But I would say the content that I have the most trouble with would probably be systems onboarding.
Okay. Is that because the system is changing or
It's
how they're
because we change systems, we update the systems, we add new
okay.
things to this. So it might be a whole new system from the last time I redid it, or it might just have
Okay.
changes and doesn't work that way. Or, even like our CRM onboarding, it's just like constant updates to onboarding because we added Copilot for sales and now the onboarding needs all updated. So I think just when I heard the self-study, I thought, maybe for systems, some kind of documentation and activities and things within it might be more scalable, or I don't know. I just didn't know if you had any advice there.
Initially, yeah, I'm not sure if there's any quick fixes given the information I have right now. But I would, I guess, wonder, do you have a structure? Do you basically have a learning journey for the different roles? And can you kind of plug and play where the existing content exists for those learner journeys? And is there a way to kind of highlight which item needs to come back? You maybe need to come back every 2 months, every 3 months. And then maybe that particular item changes format to something easier to update. Is that resonating at all or am I close?
Yeah, yeah, that makes sense.
Okay. Well,
The
and
other thing,
go ahead.
the other thing I'm thinking, this is Lisa Tunnigus. Hi, everybody, and Lindsay, good to hear you and see all your engagement today. The other thing I'm thinking is not almost a playbook, but more of a listing. So it doesn't include all the content. So you're not on this chase to always keep the content updated, but it's more of a listing, and then you point somebody to either an expert or a user manual or a something. So the document you're keeping for onboarding, you're just saying, hey, it's important to learn this system, but it's not this, you're not the one keeping the step by step on that specific system.
Yeah, yeah, that makes sense. Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you, Connie. Well, everybody, this on the screen is my contact information. You also heard from Lisa. She is the CEO, the one that was on our slide up at the beginning of the deck. You can definitely reach out to us if you have questions, if this sparked some ideas and you want to figure out, is there a way that we can apply something like this to your organization or your situation? Or maybe your situation is different, and we'll talk through how to help you in that regard as well. I know we're coming up towards the last, few minutes, so I'll just keep this open a little bit longer in case anybody has any additional questions. Other than that, thank you so much for everybody who joined. And yeah, please let us know if you have any questions.